Hi, everybody. I'm John Self, and I am, as some of my younger clients like to say, that gray haired coach who helped them find their next better job. In reality, for 27 years, I served as the managing partner of a boutique global executive search firm. And throughout my career, I recruited in 6 countries on 4 continents. I've interviewed thousands and thousands of supervisors, managers, directors, and have worked on projects at the department level, the division level, and for headquarters. Now, one of my accomplishments about which I'm probably the most proud is that I never had a mishire in a CEO search. Now, my clients credit that success to my skill as an interviewer. The art of the job interview is a big subject. I mean, you can't cover it in one session today. So, we've scheduled a 3-part course called Mastering the Art of the Job Interview. Part 1 is set to debut at 11:30 a.m. on Central Daylight Time on Thursday, September 15th, as a special Lunch and Learn presentation. Now, normally Lunch and Learns will be about 30 minutes, as is the case today, but the three Mastering the Art of the Job Interview Lunch and Learns will last 1 hour, 45 minutes of lecture, followed by a question and answer session. And with each session, there'll be downloadable tools to help you enhance your skills and preparation. Now, also, Lunch and Learns will normally be produced at no cost to you. There is a small tuition fee for each part of the Mastering the Art of the Job Interview, and part 1 is $14.95. You can sign up for that session at johngself.com. Click the little red button on the right side of the homepage, and that will take you to the enrollment page at Thinkific, our LMS partner. Now, today's Lunch and Learn is presented to help you anticipate the questions you will be asked in a typical full screening interview, although I suspect that this technique can be used with the initial screening interview as well. Now, let's get started. First, when you get that call from the screening interview, from the recruiter or the hiring authority, this is when you begin to think about the questions you want to ask. Because the more information you have, the better prepared you can be. And the better prepared you can be, the better job you can do. Now, many applicants they say they're reluctant to ask these questions because they fear alienating the recruiter or the hiring authority. Many times it's not what you ask, but how you ask it. So be friendly, be engaging. And once the time and date and logistics are communicated about the interview and are confirmed, here are 4 critical questions I suggest that you ask. First, has a more detailed job summary been developed? And if not, has the hiring authority communicated any additional preferences since she originally posted the information? 2, ask the recruiter, what is your sense of the 3 issues the hiring authority is seeking? 3, are there any special challenges that are unique to this position or organization? And 4, what is the salary range for this position? Now, for whatever reason, recruiters hate to share this information, which is just bizarre. Typically, this reluctance to disclose is a bias from HR. You might explain that you have a really challenging job, a real busy schedule, and you understand the recruiter and the hiring authority do as well. Then you can add, I would really feel bad if I inadvertently wasted your time based on compensation issues. Now, this is important, and I bring this up because each year, hundreds or more of the job applicants end up in the final interview after spending all this time for preparation and do all this work interviewing and risking exposure with their current employer, only to find out that the salary range is significantly out of sync with their current compensation. It is flattering to be recruited. And but it doesn't make a lot of sense to take a step back in pay just because you're flattered. Now, we're going to cover this issue in more detail in our Mastering the Art of the Job Interview course. Many job seekers approach preparation for the job interview with the belief that it's really difficult, probably impossible, to predict what questions will be asked. Well, in my opinion, the vast majority of in interviews, that is simply not the case. Consider these 4 vital points. First, there are only so many questions that can be asked in a job interview. I mean, it's a limited number. And there are numerous books with possible interview questions, so you need to look at those as well. My favorite is Dr. Brad Smart's Top Grading, the comprehensive review of behavior and values interviewing. And that's the most common interview style in use today. Dr. Smart and legendary GE CEO Jack Welch used this method and many of the questions to build one of the strongest leadership teams in modern business history. So get familiar with these general questions. Secondly, carefully review the latest available summary of the position. Now, generally, the job summary, even online, will be more useful than the standard legalese of most job descriptions. In fact, if you want to be surprised in your career, rely on the job description. Because when you arrive, I guarantee you, the job you find that you thought you were taking, it won't even be the same. So you need to parse the language in the job summary and look between the lines to look for possible areas of inquiry. Do a search of your professional network. This is the third thing I recommend. People may have insights into this position. Now, more on this in part one of the Mastering the Art of the Job Interview. So check your sources. These sources, either within the organization or perhaps a vendor or have other types of relationships close to the organization, can help you with operations and cultural insights, and that's really important. 4, Google the organization, and then check the profiles of the interview team on LinkedIn. You might share some information, some experience, some fraternity, sorority. Now, let's talk about the core and categorical questions that you are going to deal with. And core and categorical, it's really a great way to prepare for the job interview. I developed this process several years ago, and it is really, really effective. One of my clients said she got the job that she interviewed for because the interviewer and the team said she was probably the best prepared of all the applicants. She told me, they asked me only a few of the questions I prepared for, but I went to the interview so confident. I was so much more self-aware and could then focus on some of the other important interviewing techniques that you had helped me build up in my study. She said, these techniques helped me build engagement and trust with the team. Now, her explanation really contained an important truth, a vital takeaway for you today. Employers tend to hire the qualified people they like and trust. Engaging and building trust in the interview process is as important as the answers to your questions. So now let's focus on the purpose of today's Lunch and Learn, the core and categorical question system. So there are the categorical questions and the core questions. Let me just share some of the core questions you're going to get asked. These are, tell me about yourself. Tell me about an event earlier in your life that helped define who you are today. Describe your leadership style. What are your strengths? What are examples of things you need to work on to be more effective? Now, there are some coaches and interviewers that say that the weakness question is improper, it's impertinent, it's a stupid question. Well, actually, I don't think they know what the hell they're talking about. Because what this is, if you ask somebody their weakness, and they stumble, mumble, and fumble, you're dealing with somebody who's not very self-aware. You're dealing with somebody that may be a little bit challenged when it comes to emotional intelligence. People want to understand what your weaknesses are. That's a normal kind of question. So that's part of the core questions that you may get, along with, if we talk to your executive assistant or if we talk to your team members, how would they describe your leadership style? Now, the categorical questions, these are questions like, they cover specific job experience, skill sets, challenges, performance on the job at hand. They may include questions about finance, operations, regulatory issues, marketing, revenue, sales growth, those types of things. They're in the categories of the job description, okay? So each job has, when you break this down, you can break this down into probably 4 to 6 categories, okay? And each one of the categories is going to be finance, operations, human resources, sales, marketing, those types of things. Think about your experience. Think about this company's job description and find out what they're really looking for. Now, start by creating a form. And if you would like a copy of this form, you can email me at info@johnggself.com, and I'll be happy to share it with you at no cost. But you create a series of forms. And each page, you have the category of operations. Is it finance? Okay, talk about your 2 or 3 biggest accomplishments, biggest success with quantifiable achievements in finance. And do that again for operations, and do it again for marketing, and do it again for human resources. Quantifiable achievement in human resources that's very, very valuable and very popular right now is, what was your turnover rate? Okay, and if you had a low turnover rate, that is a very important accomplishment. If you can give specific numbers, not just percentages, but specific numbers, that can really enhance your point that that's a strength. So each one of those categories, finance, operations, human resources, marketing, sales, whatever the job is consists of, then take a page, create a page for each of those categories, and then write down your accomplishments, the quantifiable accomplishments that you've achieved, 2 or 3 for each category. Okay, once you've done that, and be sure that you can use as much of the quantifiable piece as you can, not just, I'm really good at this. That's okay, but if it's quantifiable, I increase sales from this point to this point, the before and after are always really, really strong examples. After you've done all of that, then sit down and think about, your weaknesses. What areas are you most concerned with? And this could fall into category questions about, what the hell do you hope they don't ask? And then have a really good answer for that question you hope you never get asked. Because a lot of candidates go into interviews, and there's something out there that I hope they don't ask me about this failure, this setback, this project that didn't go well. I hope they don't ask, and they don't have an interview. And so that anxiety that they're going to get asked about that interview sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it really is a distraction during their interview. People say that when they think of the worst question they can be asked and they're ready to answer it, it does great things for their confidence, and they're more self-aware. Okay? So what's the 1 or 2 questions you hope to God they don't ask? And then start thinking about questions you would ask for each category if you were leading the interview. Write down between 5 and 10 questions you would want to ask if you were involved in the interview process for this job. Do you think would be essential for any candidate to be able to answer? I assure you that is going to take you light years closer to being fully prepared for this job interview. This is not a rocket science formula. We call it core and categorical because there are 2 basic kinds of questions. The core questions, more about the behavior and values interview style, and the categorical question, more about how did you perform? What did you do? What is the evidence of your success? And when you're ready to talk about those in each category of the job, whether it's human resources or some other element of the job, then you're going to go into that interview and be more confident. Okay, so let me take just a brief moment and back up for a second and talk about journaling. Journaling is something that I really think is important, and I think it can be very, very instrumental in helping you accelerate your career and be more successful. Jack Welch and some of the other great leaders of the 80s, the 90s, and early 2000s have written about this, that journaling was a very meaningful thing in their lives. It becomes very helpful in the job interview because as you start thinking back over your previous experience, not your current job, but your previous jobs, because you need to put together core and categorical questions and things you're concerned about and accomplishments for each of the jobs you've held. So you repeat the process. But when you get into that, you are able to kind of go back and look at your journal and look at some of the accomplishments you achieved when you were a director or when you were assistant vice president. And it may have been 2 or 3 years ago or 5 years ago. But being able to say, I don't remember, is a terrible, terrible thing to say in an interview. It is so impressive that if you ask a candidate about a job he had 7 or 8 years ago, and he can get very specific about things that he or she accomplished, that's impressive. That's really, really impressive. And it instills confidence. So if you have a journal and you keep a record of your jobs, your tenures, your salaries, your reviews, and your significant accomplishments in each job, that becomes a treasure trove as you move forward in your career to be able to go back and help you prepare for job interviews. And that supports this whole nature of the core and categorical process. So please, if you don't journal now, please journal. I've written several blogs on this. You can find those at johngself.com under the blog tab. There's over 1,000 articles and videos in that library. So look up the ones I've written on journaling. That should be very, very helpful. Now, the other thing I want to talk about here is when you are getting prepared for the interview, if you really take the time and prepare, you will be more confident, and you will be, this is really important, more self-aware. Now, people they said, well, what is it so that makes difficult interviewing so unique and so uniquely challenging? Well, it is the most unique form of communication. And the people who are naturally good at job interviews are people that would probably be world-class extemporaneous speaking. I once described the search process as getting married after 4 dates, but the interview process is like an extemporaneous speaking contest with 70 to 75 questions. So, the people that are really good at that tend to do a little bit better in interviewing. Another group of people that tend to do very well in interviewing are former high school and college debaters, because they understand the value of preparation. One of the biggest problems I saw as a recruiter, and I saw it over and over for 27 years, is that people show up to the interviews and they're not prepared. They haven't thought about the core and categorical questions. They haven't thought about how they're going to answer particularly challenging issues in their career. Their preparation is, well, I read the website and I read the job description. Okay. Now, I presented as an executive recruiter, I presented a very detailed position prospectus that covered a lot of detail. And you know what happened sometimes? Before we started the 2 or 3 hour interview together, I'd say, tell me if you have any questions. And they would start asking me questions that were right out of the position prospectus. They hadn't read it. So if you are serious about being the best you can be, and being the job applicant everybody wants to hire, then the first thing you got to do is quit being lazy and get prepared for the job interviews. Just showing up and answering questions does not work anymore. And as we move into this period of technology and of screening and a higher level of sophistication in screening applicants, if you show up and you're not prepared, you are asking to be eliminated. And when you're eliminated, basically you're being told you weren't good enough. Well, you may be a competent executive and you may have a good track record, but if you don't come to the interview prepared, that's going to be really tough for you to be successful to get the job of your dreams. There's a couple of times in my career when I interviewed somebody 2 or 3 times for a different job. One time I thought they would get selected. I was really high on them. They weren't selected. So I used them again in another search a year later. And then they weren't selected, and I used them a 3rd time. And what I really kept thinking, what am I missing? Why are they not being picked? And then I started looking at the video. I would videotape the interviews that I conducted. And I started looking at the videos. They were making mistakes that I was a little bit immune to. I didn't catch. And what was so interesting is they kept making the same mistake over and over. So if I interviewed them 3 times, they did basically the same thing 3 times. And that's not very, but that's just bad. So I'm now, toward the end of my career, after the 2nd time, if you weren't picked for a job, I did not generally go back and present you again unless there were really extenuating circumstances. So it's important for you to understand the process of the interview. It's important for you to be able to really have a standard of performance. if you don't understand the process, if you don't understand the various interview forms, the strategies, and the things that you have to be able to accomplish in each of the 5 interview categories, it's very difficult for you to enhance your performance. You have to have a standard of performance before you can improve. If you just show up and answer questions and try to be competent and credible, that's not good enough. So you really need to understand the interview process, really get familiar with that, and then start understanding what strategies you need to use in each one of those categories. And we'll talk about that in part 1 of Mastering the Art of the Job Interview. But this core and categorical process that I've shared with you today, that's really, really something that a tool you can use. So remember, if you'd like a copy, email me at info@johngself.com. And I've never used this particular live system before. It's called Restream. And so I'm not sure how they use the chat or if there are any questions you might want to ask. But if we can't figure that out today, it will be, we'll take care of it for the next one. The Lunch and Learn with the 3 courses, you sign up for those on my website, and that's a different distributor. And so they have built in, it uses Zoom, whereas this is a little bit different studio format. So I'm learning that. But if you have any questions you would like to ask, you can text me or you can email me, and I'll be happy to get back with you. We're here to help. I think I've seen a lot of people lose out in job interviews because they showed up and they weren't prepared. And they had read the job description, they had looked at the company's website, but they hadn't even gone through and looked at the LinkedIn profiles of the people that would be interviewing them. They did not think about answers to questions they might be asked. Okay, before we run out of time today, we've got about 8 more minutes left, let me touch on one other issue, okay? And that is, more than likely, the first question you're going to be asked, it's one of those ubiquitous interview first questions, is, tell me about yourself, or, why do you want to work here? So they're closely related. Let's talk about, tell me about yourself. Well, let me tell you what a recruiter and probably the job hiring authority does not want to hear. They do not want to hear a rambling recall of your career. What they want to hear is why they should hire you. And so in that first opportunity, when they say, tell us a little bit about yourself, that's a question you need to have prepared and not memorized. You need to have it committed to your heart. And you need to talk about your values, your value brand statement, communicate your values, communicate your success, and tie those issues to what the employer's needs are. Because this is not about you. It is about meeting the needs of the prospective employer. And the interview is not about you credibly answering questions. You have to communicate your value. And you have to do that with careful preparation and even using stories to illustrate your successes. But those first 2 questions are so important because if you stumble, mumble, and bumble through that first question, it sets the tone for the interview. But when somebody says, tell us why you want to work here, again, it's a similar answer. You tie in your value brand statement to their needs and talk about how excited you are about their mission or how excited you are about the challenges that you think this position is facing. And again, whether it's a board or whether it's a management team or whether it's a CEO or whoever, people get hired, because they are competent, but because they are trusted and people like them. Okay, so I think that's really, really important. And that's pretty much, we're running out of time today. I want to thank you for joining us for our first Lunch and Learn. And if you have any comments or suggestions, email at info@johngself.com or drop them in if you're watching on YouTube or LinkedIn. Put them in the chat there. And I will, as I learn, I will do a better job at figuring this out so I can do a better job in giving you the information and support you need in your job career and your job search. Thanks so much, and see you next time.